Our son didn't shout. He didn't tremble. He simply pushed us inside the basement, stepped back, and slammed the heavy wooden door with a finality that felt like a judge striking his gavel. The metal lock scraped. Once, twice, then silence. Except for my own heartbeat, Thomas stood beside me, his fragile hand finding mine in the dim yellow glow of a flickering bulb. His breath shook. Mine didn't. Shock has a strange way of making a mother very, very still. Above us, I heard Daniel's voice. Our Daniel say to his wife, "Good. They won't get in our way anymore." Grace didn't reply. The footsteps simply drifted away, growing lighter, more distant, until we heard the front door open and close. The house that had known our laughter exhaled. I swallowed. The cold concrete pressed through my shoes. Dust floated in thin columns of light. And then Thomas leaned toward me so close I felt the tremor in his jaw and whispered, "Evelyn, don't be afraid. They don't know what's behind that wall." His eyes weren't frightened. They were determined. A secret, buried in our own basement? I didn't ask. Not yet. A wife knows when her husband needs a moment before he can speak his truth. For now, dears, let me take a breath and welcome you. Hello, dear listeners. Thank you for being here with me today. Before I share what happened next, it would warm my old heart if you subscribed and perhaps left a comment telling me where in the world you're listening from. Your messages travel farther than my aging legs ever could. Now, where was I? Ah, yes, this basement. Our basement has lived with us for 40 years. It breathes in its own way. It remembers. And somewhere behind one of these walls, my husband's secret waited quietly, patiently, for the moment. Daniel locked us in. Savannah has a way of making a morning look kinder than it truly is. The sun slipped through the lace curtains and soft gold ribbons, warming the kitchen floor as if nothing cruel waited on the other side of daylight. I should have known better. Mothers feel storms before clouds appear. But that morning, I let myself believe peace was real. The kettle began to whistle low at first, then rising gently, like an old friend calling my name. I moved slowly, my joints reminding me of their age, my robe brushing the tiles with each step. The smell of jasmine tea drifted upward as I poured, and for a moment the world felt steady, familiar. Thomas was on the porch, his rocking chair croaking its usual greeting. He always watched the river at dawn, the way the light caught the water, the way fishermen cast their lines like they were sending prayers into the current. From the window, I saw his shoulders rise and fall, calm, steady, unaware of the betrayal already circling our day. I set his cup beside him, steam curling toward his face. He smiled without looking at me, the way husbands do after decades together, quiet, comfortable, knowing. His hand brushed mine, warm and trembling. I thought it was age. Little did I know it was fear. Daniel arrived an hour later. Too early, too tense. But at that moment, I convinced myself he simply wanted to see us. A foolish grace mothers give their children long after they've grown. Grace, our daughter-in-law, stood behind him on the walkway, eyes down, hands clasped too tightly. The river breeze lifted her hair, but she didn't lift her gaze. Yes, that morning lied to me. The sunlight, the tea, the rocking porch, they wrapped themselves around me like a gentle shawl, hiding the truth that before sunset, our own son would lock us in the dark beneath our home. Hope can be such a gentle fool. It makes old parents move through their home with a kind of fragile sweetness, doing small things as if small things can keep a family from breaking. That afternoon, Thomas and I prepared for Daniel and Grace's visit the way we always did, with the quiet eagerness of people who still believed their presence was a blessing, not a warning. I laid out the good tablecloth, the white cotton one embroidered with tiny blue flowers my mother stitched before her hands grew too stiff. It had seen birthdays, holidays, and dinners full of laughter. I smoothed it carefully, trying not to notice how the edges had begun to fray like a metaphor I didn't want to face. Thomas carried the plates from the cupboard, his fingers trembling more than usual. "Let me help," I said gently. He shook his head with a soft smile. "Old bones," he whispered. But there was something else in his eyes, something tight, something shadowed. A flicker of worry he tried to swallow. I watched him from the corner of my eye as he set each plate down with deliberate care. "One, Pause. 2. Pause. 3. As if counting helped steady him, on the mantel, I straightened the old family photographs. Daniel's graduation. Our first Christmas in this house. Little memories frozen behind glass like butterflies pinned for display. Their smiles felt heavier than the frames holding them. I added fresh flowers to the table, a small vase of camellias from the garden. Soft pink. Gentle, hopeful. The kind of flowers you place when you still believe your child is coming to see you, not what you own. The house felt warm, almost shy, as if waiting for the echo of footsteps it loved. I didn't know, not then, that these small preparations were not signs of love being welcomed, but the last innocent acts before our son decided he didn't need parents anymore, only their home. Grace stepped inside first, not with a smile. Not with her usual soft greeting. She entered like someone crossing a threshold. She wished she didn't have to touch, her shoulders pulled tight. Her steps small and careful, as if the floor itself held a secret she didn't want to disturb. "Hello, Grace," I said gently. She nodded, but her eyes, they didn't meet mine. They flicked around the room, instead the table, the hallway, the stairs, and then, very quickly, toward the basement door. A glance so fast most people would have missed it. But a mother notices such things. Her fingers twisted the strap of her purse, knuckles pale. The river breeze followed her in, stirring the curtains, carrying a sweetness that felt at odds with the tension she brought with her. Thomas moved toward her with his usual kindness. "Good to see you, dear." But she flinched at the sound of his voice, just a fraction. Barely a breath, yet enough to make my heart press against my ribs. I offered her tea. Her hands shook too much to take it. Instead, she whispered, "Daniel will be right in." But her tone carried the weight of someone reciting a line they didn't believe. Her gaze darted again toward that basement door, that lock, that space beneath our feet where we had stored decades of life. And where, unbeknownst to me, my husband had stored something else. Grace swallowed hard and stepped back, placing distance between us and herself. Her eyes were glossy, not with tears, but with guilt, a kind that doesn't spill, a kind that sinks. For a moment, I saw a young woman trapped in her own quiet misery, forced into something she didn't want to be part of. But the moment passed quickly. She lowered her head, tightened her grip on her purse, and absolutely refused to look my way again. And in that silence, in that tiny, trembling glance toward the basement door, I felt the first shift in the air, a warning I didn't yet understand. When Daniel finally stepped inside, the room seemed to shift around him like the air itself held its breath. He didn't hug me, didn't reach for my hand, didn't even offer that polite half-smile grown children give their aging parents. He just walked past me, eyes fixed somewhere over my shoulder, as if meeting my gaze might break something inside him. "Daniel," I whispered. Nothing. He kept moving, the floorboards creaking under his heavy steps, and for a moment I saw not the man he had become, but the little boy he once was, the child who used to run through this house with muddy sneakers, laughing so loud the windows felt alive. The boy who'd bring me river stones as gifts, calling them treasures. The boy whose bedtime prayers always ended with, "And keep mama safe." But that boy, he no longer lived in the eyes of the man in my living room. His shoulders were broader now, jaw tighter, hair darker around the temples, but it was the expression that struck me hardest. A coldness that didn't belong to the child we raised. Thomas watched him carefully, one hand gripping the back of a chair for balance. I knew that tremor wasn't age, it was dread. Grace stood behind Daniel, her gaze glued to the floor, her silence trembling. "Is everything all right?" I asked softly, hoping the gentleness in my voice might reach him. It didn't. He brushed past me again, this time with intentional distance, the kind that slices deeper than anger, because anger can become forgiveness. Distance rarely does. Daniel's eyes never met mine, not once. And somehow, that hurt more than the betrayal that was about to happen, more than any locked door, more than any basement a mother can survive. Many wounds, but the wound of being unseen by the child she raised is the one that bleeds the slowest. Daniel closed the basement door behind us without haste. No shaking hands, no heavy breathing, just a quiet, practiced movement as if he had rehearsed this moment long before he carried it out. The click of the latch echoed through the concrete room, a sound too soft for the violence it carried. He stood at the top of the stairs, one hand on the railing, looking down at us the way a landlord might look at unwanted tenants. Not children, not parents, just obstacles. Daniel, I whispered, my voice thin as dust. You'll stay down here for a while, he said. Calm, measured, as if he were discussing weather, not imprisonment. A chill moved through my spine, not because of the basement air but because of the tone. That tone I had never heard from him, not even as a rebellious teenager. Son, Thomas murmured. What is this? Daniel exhaled through his nose, annoyed more than ashamed. You shouldn't call me that right now. Grace stood behind him, her fingers wide around the stair railing. Her eyes glistened, but she didn't speak. Not one word. We're doing what's necessary, Daniel continued. For the house, for our future, for stability. He said future the way some people say profit. Empty, hollow, rehearsed. Daniel, we gave you this home, I said softly. Everything we ever had, and that's the problem. He cut in. You think it's still yours? His voice didn't rise. It didn't need to. Cruelty delivered quietly is often the most efficient kind. We'll come back in a few hours, he added, as if that were mercy. Thomas stepped forward, gripping the railing. Daniel, you cannot do this. For a moment, just when our son's jaw tightened. A flicker of guilt, a shadow of the boy he used to be, but it vanished as quickly as it came. He stepped back, reached for the door, and said the last words before the lock turned. It's easier this way, for all of us. Then darkness, dust, silence, and my heart, learning, in one brutal instant, that betrayal doesn't always shout. Sometimes it speaks gently, with your child's voice. The basement swallowed sound the moment the door closed above us. A heavy, breathless silence settled over the concrete, thick enough to feel on the skin. Dust floated like pale ghosts in the narrow beam of weak light leaking through the vents, and the smell of damp wood mixed with the metallic sting of fear. I stood there, arms wrapped around myself, trying to steady the thudding in my chest. Thomas stayed near the steps at first, frozen, as though his mind couldn't accept the reality of what our son had done. His silhouette was hunched, smaller than I'd ever seen it. For a moment, I thought he'd speak in anger or panic, but instead, he sank slowly onto the old workbench, elbows on his knees, breathing hard. We didn't talk. Words felt useless against the cruelty of what had happened. Only the soft hum of the house above filtered down, muffled, distant, like a life we no longer belonged to. Then, after what felt like hours compressed into minutes, Thomas lifted his head. Evelyn, his voice was fragile, barely a breath. I stepped closer. Yes, he leaned in, eyes shining not with fear but with something sharper, something purposeful. There's something I never told you. My heart lurched. Not now, I thought. Not in this darkness. But he continued, his voice steadying as though speaking the truth gave him strength. Behind that wall, he whispered, nodding toward the far corner where the concrete turned rough and uneven. There's an old beam hollow inside. I hid something there, years ago. A shiver slid down my spine. Thomas, what did you hide? He exhaled slowly, a breath trembling with the weight of long-buried decisions. Something Daniel doesn't know exists. Something he can't know. And it might be the only thing that saves us now. The basement suddenly felt smaller. The air tighter. Because whatever secret my husband had buried in that wall was waking up in the dark with us. The corner Thomas pointed to looked ordinary at first, just another patch of old basement wall, chipped and stained by years of forgotten seasons. But when I moved closer, the air felt different there, heavier, somehow, as if the wall itself had been holding its breath for decades. Waiting, Thomas joined me slowly, his footsteps dragging across the concrete. His hands trembled as he reached out, brushing dust from the rough surface. It's this one, he murmured, touching a brick that looked just slightly out of place. I remembered him working down here in the early years of our marriage, long nights fixing shelves, creating storage, escaping his thoughts. I had never imagined he had built more than what I could see. "Why did you hide something here?" I asked quietly. He didn't answer immediately. Instead, he pressed his thumb along the brick's edge, finding a small gap. With a gentle tug, the brick shifted, scraping softly before sliding out into his palm. Behind it, darkness yawned, a small hollowed-out space only a few inches deep, lined with the wood of an old beam he had carved open and resealed. The sight of it made my heart tighten. A secret this deliberate, this careful, was never small. Thomas stared into the gap for a long moment before speaking. "I made this before Daniel was even born," he whispered. "Back when I thought, when I feared, that life might take everything from us one day." His confession vibrated in the quiet, thick with years of buried worry. I felt fear curl in my stomach, but hope too, faint and trembling. "What's inside?" He slid his hand into the dark cavity, fingers brushing something wrapped, firm, and cold. When he pulled it free, dust fell like gray snow. A small metal box, dented at the corners, rested in his hands, a box I had never seen, yet somehow felt part of our entire marriage. The weight of it seemed larger than its size. Whatever waited inside was the truth he had carried alone all these years. The basement had always been the part of the house I avoided unless necessary, too cold, too cluttered, too quiet. But standing there now, beneath the low ceiling and single flickering bulb, I felt something I hadn't expected. Familiarity. The kind that presses against the heart like an old photograph you forgot existed. Thomas set the metal box gently on the floor beside us, his breathing slow and uneven. Dust drifted lazily in the light above, catching the air like memories suspended, refusing to settle. "This place," I whispered, letting my fingertips graze the stacked crates, the worn workbench, the shelves sagging under the weight of forgotten tools. "It's held more of our life than we realized." Thomas nodded, almost ashamed. "I used to come down here after every argument we ever had. Not to run away, just to think." I pictured him younger, shoulders unburdened yet somehow heavier, sanding wood with that quiet frustration men carry when they don't know how to say what hurts them. The walls around us felt different now, almost alive, as if they were listening again, the way they must have listened during storms, during laughter, during years when Daniel was a baby learning to walk and Thomas rebuilt an old crib in this very room. A lump rose in my throat. "Do you remember?" I murmured. "When the power went out for 3 days, and we slept down here because it was cooler?" He smiled faintly. "You used to say the darkness made the house feel honest." And it struck me brutally, quietly, how this basement had witnessed more truth than our living room ever had. Up there, we displayed our lives. Down here, we lived the parts we never spoke about. The betrayal of Daniel locking us in this place hurt, but the space itself felt almost protective, like an old friend trying its best to make room for our breaking hearts. I glanced toward the small metal box again. Even the secrets we buried had roots in these walls. Maybe that was why the truth had waited here, patiently for the day it would finally be needed. There are heartbreaks that arrive loud, slammed doors, shouted words, shattered plates. And then there are heartbreaks that accumulate quietly, like dust settling on a shelf no one touches anymore. With Daniel, it was always the quiet kind. I sat on the cool basement floor, knees pulled to my chest, as memories rose uninvited, soft, slow, painful. It didn't happen all at once. It never does. It started the year he moved out. He hugged us, yes, but it was the kind of hug a person gives while thinking of their car keys. A pat on the back, a distracted smile, a love you tossed over the shoulder. Then came the visits, shorter each time. He'd walk through the door, kiss my cheek without meeting my eyes, ask Thomas about the weather as if he were speaking to a neighbor, not the man who raised him. I used to watch him from the kitchen doorway. He'd stand in our living room but feel like a guest, or worse, like a stranger trying not to touch anything. There were moments that pierced deeper than arguments ever could, like the Thanksgiving he arrived, handed me a store-bought pie, and checked his phone before even taking off his coat. Or the Christmas he stayed only 20 minutes because Grace didn't feel like being around old people today. Or the summer afternoon he walked right past me in the garden, earbuds in, sunglasses on, and didn't notice the way my hands trembled trying to prune roses he once planted with me as a boy. I used to whisper to myself, "He's busy. He's tired. He'll come back to us." Thomas's hand warmed mine in the dim light. "Let them read every page," he murmured. "Your father built this house to protect you, and now it's doing exactly that." I didn't respond. There was nothing to say. Revenge didn't always come in flames or fury. Sometimes it arrived like morning frost, soft but undeniable. We heard a drawer slam, then another. Daniel searching for anything, papers, loopholes, deeds that could contradict what was written in those letters. But my father had been thorough. The house, the land, the accounts, everything had been tied to my name decades before Daniel was even imagined. Grace's voice broke next. "What do we do now? We can't take the house. We can't, Daniel. We can't do anything." I rested my head back against the cool brick wall. I didn't smile, but a calm settled deep inside me. I didn't need to shout. I didn't need to confront them. The walls of this house, the same walls they tried to trap us behind, were giving our answer for us. Upstairs, the arguing grew louder. Frustration, fear, realization. Down here, Thomas and I simply waited, for the first time in a long time. The house was speaking on my behalf. The door to the basement opened, not with drama, not with apologies, but with a silence so complete it felt like the house itself was exhaling after holding its breath all night. A faint stripe of morning light slipped down the stairs, thin as a ribbon, touching the dust in the air. It shimmered, soft and golden, like something blessing the moment without speaking. Thomas reached for my hand before we climbed a single step. His palm was warm, steady, alive. "We're going home now," he whispered. And he didn't mean the upstairs rooms. He meant back to ourselves. We stepped into the hallway slowly. Daniel and Grace stood far from the door, stiff, not angry anymore, not bold, just small. Two people who had gambled everything and realized too late they knew nothing at all. Thomas didn't look at them. Neither did I. Forgiveness wasn't owed to them, nor did they deserve it. But I forgave myself for the years I kept quiet, for loving too blindly, for hoping longer than I should have. The house felt different now. Not haunted by what happened, but relieved. The morning light touched the frames on the wall, the old rug, Thomas's shoes, my skirt moving with a gentleness that felt almost human, almost grateful. We walked past our son without a word. Not revenge, not triumph. Simply choosing not to carry the weight of his choices any longer. Outside, the pecan trees rustled in a breeze that smelled of warm earth and distant salt water. Birds were already awake. Somewhere, a neighbor's kettle whistled. Life had moved on, waiting for us to catch up. Thomas slipped his arm around my shoulders. "We made it," he said quietly, and as we stepped onto our own porch, into the light, into the day that belonged only to us, I realized something simple and profound. We hadn't just walked out of the basement. We had walked out of every shadow we ever allowed ourselves to live in, finally free.